I'm Stephen Farber. I'm going to be conducting the discussion, and a pleasure to have Gale and Hurd, the producer and co-writer of Terminator, and she went on to produce the follow-up Terminator movies, also such successful films as Aliens, The Abyss, The Ghost in the Darkness, Armageddon, Ang Lee's Hulk. She also did some smaller films like The Water Dance, Safe Passage. She was a producer of the enormously successful Walking Dead series for television, and has been active in the documentary field as well, including such films, a number of movies about the contributions of Native Americans. Very important work early on, before it became quite as fashionable an issue as it has become. So let me ask first, you started out working for Roger Corman, who we just lost this past year, and I'm interested in what you kind of learned from him, what the value of that experience turned out to be.
I learned is this on?
No, push the button.
Oh, yeah. Tech. I'm not good with tech, surprisingly. I learned everything from Roger Corman. Absolutely everything. When I graduated from college, there were no women producing that I was aware of. Remember, there was no internet back then. You couldn't chuck anything out. And my first interview, Roger said to me, "What career do you want to pursue?" And I thought, I'll be, assistant for life. That sounded like a good option. And it was clear that was not the answer he was looking for. So I said producer, and within 3 years I was producing for Roger. The important thing, though, to realize is that anyone can call themselves a producer. That doesn't mean they are a producer. And Roger realized that and made me, after I'd run marketing at his company, start out as a production assistant. I was emptying chemical toilets in motorhomes. I was driving the cast around because, of course, this was non-union. I'm very glad that Teamsters are doing it in real life. And he also taught me how to schedule, how to budget, how to negotiate cast deals, post-production. I was in the editing room. I learned how to market films. I learned how to distribute films.
She's gonna get you some water.
I can't drink the water. So.
Right. And did he help you at all in kind of making the move into filmmaking of your own?
Well, the first thing Roger did was say no to the Terminator. So I would say yes. I think I swallowed part of my mask. Wow, I've never had this happen before. I think I will need to stop. Excuse me.
Yeah.
So Roger actually said, "I think this is a brilliant script. If you make it for me, it'll be a failure. You can't make this movie for $2 million, which was the highest budget that he would make a film for. Which is when Jim and I worked on Battle Beyond the Stars. That was the highest budget he'd ever made, and it was $2 million. But it was through Roger Corman that the film got made, because that's where I got to know Mike Medavoy, who was heading up Orion, and most importantly, Barbara Boyle, who'd gone to work for Mike Medavoy, who was a vice president at Orion Pictures, and Francis Dole, who is the story editor. And they championed the film at Orion.
Right. So when you and Jim Cameron, though, began thinking about this movie, what was the inspiration? And there's an acknowledgement to Harlan Ellison, and has been. I mean, what?
So Harlan Ellison sued us because he said we stole all of his work, which, of course, is ludicrous.
Right.
And Jim and I could not defend ourselves. The insurance company settled with Harlan. We had no say in any of it. And he did not, contrary to what the late Harlan Ellison may have thought, he did not invent time travel. He did not invent cyborgs. He did not invent robotics. So it is patently ludicrous.
All right, so we have established that he had nothing to do with it. So what were the inspirations for the story? How did you first start talking about it and thinking about it?
Jim was in post-production on Piranha 2. He was in Rome, breaking into the editing room to repair the edits that the producer of a video Asanitas had made on the film. Because Jim was locked out of the editing room, but Jim is resourceful, and you can break into an editing room with a credit card. And he got very sick. And honestly, he had a fever dream. And he saw in his dream, the robotic endoskeleton of the Terminator emerging from the flames. You just saw that.
Right.
That's where the Terminator started. That one image. And he called me up. Once again, no cell phones. So it wasn't as easy as it seems, because I had to be home. It was Rome. It was Los Angeles. We both had to be on hardline phones. When we finally spoke, he said, I think I know the film that we're going to make together. Because we had made a deal when we were working on Battle Beyond the Stars together, and I was the assistant production manager and helped get him the job of art director, that we would work together in the future after I'd produced a film and after he had directed a film. And this was the kernel of the idea that became The Terminator, our first film together.
Right. So, I mean, you mentioned the idea of time travel, which is fascinating, but a challenge to tell that kind of a story and make it clear to audiences. How did you did you struggle with that, and how did you resolve that you were going to make it that part of the story so that the audience would be able to follow the back and forth?
Well, the first thing is, one of the reasons there's time travel is because we knew that we would never have the budget to have this entire film take place in the future.
Right.
And it's funny how your first film comes to be. Some of it is just absolute creative inspiration. The other of it is practical reality. And the reality in this case was, okay, what's the most money we can get to tell this story? And then we kept having to say, well, maybe we can't show so much of the War of the Future. So that's how we decided it needed to be contemporary Los Angeles. And then with time travel, obviously, Terminator does not exist now, nor did it exist in 1984. Yeah. So we had to come up with, how did it get here? Well, that was time travel. And but we really felt the most important thing, the most complicated thing about the film is that if Kyle Reese had not been sent back from the future by the man who turns out to have been his son,
Right.
the son wouldn't have existed. So it is really one of those very complex things that thankfully most people don't concern themselves with.
Right. Well, if they're caught up in the ride, they definitely.
Yes, but I'm sure the people in this audience have probably thought about that conundrum.
I think most people in the audience have seen the movie a few times before, I would guess. Probably. How many? Yeah. So, we're holding this screening partly in celebration of Art House Day and independent cinema. And on the one hand, this movie would seem to be an action sci-fi movie, but I think you consider it also in the independent
well, it is
film
independent.
field.
You could not come up with a more independent film.
Okay.
We had to come up with the financing. It wasn't financed by a major studio.
Right.
It was financed by a combination of independent money, an advance from HBO, pre-selling foreign. I mean, that's an independent film. In addition to that, the budget was not massive. It was distributed by a mini major. And, and then I guess, as we're seeing now, the company that originally financed it or co-financed it, Hemdale, went bankrupt. So anyway, yes, it is an independent film. And I just can't say how important it is to support independent cinemas. And to be in the Laemmle Theater is just so rewarding to me, because Laemmle Theaters are where I always went to watch films. The other thing, a lot of people don't know, when I worked for Roger Corman, in addition to making the exploitation movies that we all remember him for, he distributed the top foreign language films. So when I was working for him, there was Ingmar Bergman films, there were Volker Schlondorf films, Akira Kurosawa, Francois Truffaut, and these are films that shaped me
Right.
as a filmmaker, and I had access to them because I worked for Roger, and we all have access to the best films because of independent cinemas.
Right. So now, say a little about putting together the cast for the movie. Schwarzenegger was already a star, so was he in from the beginning?
As many of you know, because I have a feeling that a lot of you have read Terminator lore, some which is true, some which isn't. We were pitched Arnold Schwarzenegger to play the role that Michael Biehn played initially. And Lance Henriksen, who plays, police detective in this, was originally going to be the Terminator. And I still have the artwork at home that Jim drew, because as many of you know, Jim is an amazing artist. And to support himself, he would do key art for films. So a lot of the exploitation films that you saw, not from Roger Corman, but from other companies, the artwork was created by Jim before he became a famous, world famous, box office breaking director. And yet, just as now, for these two newbies, the only movie I had made at this point was Smokey Bites the Dust. And don't confuse it with Smokey and the Bandit. It was a successful film. Mine was not. And Jim had done Piranha 2: The Spawning. And if you'd seen either of those films, you would not think that either of us would have a future career. So it was a hard scrabble fight to get this movie going. And so obviously we needed someone to anchor the film. We had this amazing lunch with Arnold. God bless Arnold. And we went to lunch at Scandia, which was a very pricey restaurant. neither of us had credit cards because you had to actually have a bank account and a job to get a credit card. At this point, I wasn't working with Roger, so we had this lovely lunch in which everything that Arnold responded to in the film was a Terminator scene. And so by the end, we said, Jim said, it seems like you really like the Terminator. And it was clear that he did. And then at the end, we were like, this is fantastic, he's in. Hoping that he would leave and we could figure out how we were going to pay the bill. Arnold didn't leave. The bill came, the staff came and started putting the chairs on the tables. And they said, you need to settle your bill. God bless him. Arnold said, you can't afford to pay it, can you? So here we are. We've got a $6 million movie that we're trying to get Arnold to star in, and we can't pick up the lunch tab. And Arnold said, this once happened to me at a restaurant in New York, and they cut up my credit card. His credit card was rejected, and he bought lunch and starred in the movie as the Terminator.
Great story. Yes. And then, how did you come to Linda Hamilton and Michael Biehn?
Those were actually through our casting director, Stancy Stokes, and they're amazing and incredible agents. I just want to say, I mean, it may be a different landscape now, but back then, I had the greatest respect for agents. One of the reasons that it was through their agents. Arnold's agent was Lou Pitt, who emailed me today. So not about the screening, but honestly, just amazing people. And Ed L'Amato, the late great Ed L'Amato, represented Michael Biehn. To be honest, I can't remember at the time who represented Linda Hamilton, but they fought hard not only for their actors to get cast in the film, but when there was a lack of confidence in whether this film was going to be a good film and successful, the agents went to the mat for it, and basically there was not going to be a critic screening of the film. Now that may not seem like a big deal now, that's very common. Back then, all films were screened for critics because that's, people actually read newspapers. And
right.
and film critics, as you know, had enormous impact.
Right.
And if you didn't screen a film for critics, that sent the message immediately that there was something wrong with it.
Right.
And Ed L'Amato said that he would not allow the actors that he represented, which included Richard Gere and Mel Gibson, who were both starring in huge films for Orion, to star in films if they didn't support the film, show it to the critics. And lo and behold, we made Time Magazine's 10 best list.
Right.
So let's hear it, for agents, for managers, for people who really back not only the actors, but the films that they're in.
Right. Well, I remember, I actually saw the movie when it came out in 1984, and I wasn't always a fan of action or science fiction, but this one grabbed me. I mean, I thought it was such ingenious storytelling, for one thing, besides being well executed on a relatively modest budget, I know, for the special effects and all, but it was also a really ingeniously told story, I think. So I felt that even then, and it still holds up in that regard.
The interesting thing is you were asking about, what inspired the film. So to that end, Mad Max. Mad Max was a huge inspiration for this film. And then in a totally different way, which has to do with, something we're all struggling with today, which is artificial intelligence.
Right.
It could not be a more different film, but 2001: A Space Odyssey. So I think, I think that those films both contributed enormously. A lot more than the work of Harlan Ellison to the genesis of the Terminator.
Right. So you went on to do some very big budget blockbuster movies, and you also did some smaller films. Did you enjoy both of those realms as much?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the truth is that, just because something's bigger doesn't necessarily mean it's better.
Right.
And not every film should have an enormous budget. I'm still very, very proud of The Water Dance, the late Neil Jimenez's film. It won the Audience Award at Sundance, it was directed. Neil was paraplegic, wrote, co-directed it, stellar cast, and we did it for under $2 million.
Right. So we've obviously been going through some major changes in the film business in the last few years, and some people stopped going out to theaters. Do you think that the theatrical experience is still crucial, and that how do we get more people to come back to see movies in theaters? Obviously, a lot of you tonight wanted to see this on the big screen. You could watch it at home, but you chose to see it in a theater, and I think it's a different kind of experience. But what's your hope for the future in that regard?
I think that there is nothing better than sitting in a dark theater with a number of other people watching a movie. You can't get the same thing regardless of how great your sound system is at home. You just can't. It's a communal experience, and there is no substitute. That's why, whenever I can, I will go speak at at screenings, because a lot of times what it takes to get people, oh God, my phone, is for the filmmakers or the cast to come to theaters. And what a day. Every independent filmmaker, independent film theater has a difficult job, because what is it that gets people to turn out? And there are a number of different things that will, and part of it is retrospective screenings like this one, but it's wonderful to see the independent films coming out and having an enormous impact,
right?
And the want to see, so I do think that there's going to be a resurgence, because how many other things get people out of the house?
Right. Speaking of the theatrical experience, it's not just the big screen and the better sound that you have compared to, as you say, even a good sound system at home, but it's the shared experience with the audience, that moments in this movie when people laugh together or are jolted at the same time. His line, "I'll be back," was applauded by the audience. You can't duplicate that at home when you're just watching it by yourself or with one or two other people.
No, and it's just like, it's like the difference between, I'm a huge soccer fan. I'm going to see Arsenal versus Man United. I'm an Arsenal fan at SoFi Stadium this weekend. It's the same as, like, the difference between watching your favorite sports team on TV and going to see them in real life. Right. I mean, this, yes, it's celluloid, digital, whatever. It's still an experience that there is a different feeling when you're with a number of other people enjoying something, or being frightened by something, or laughing at something, and or having a profoundly dramatic moment.
Right, right, yes. So it was great that we could all share this together tonight. Thank you very much, Gale, for joining us here. Keep coming back to movie theaters, everybody.
And honestly, I am here because of all of you, because it means so much to me that over 40 years after Jim and I made this film, that it's still important to you and justified you getting home, leaving your home and coming to the theater and enjoying it. Because, when we made the film, as I was saying, we struggled initially, that the film was not going to get the kind of release that we hoped it would get. We were told that it was a terrible film, that it was a down and dirty exploitation film, that we'd be out of the theaters in a couple of weeks. There was going to be no money for a second weekend in advertising, none, because they said the word of mouth would be so terrible. As a essentially first-time filmmakers of our own project, you can imagine how that made us feel. I mean, it was like, okay, what are we going to pivot to? Because if your first film is Smoky Bites to the Dust and Piranha 2, and your second film is a disaster, you don't get a third film. Right. So it's just so meaningful to me that 40 years later, a film that was going to be written off as a disaster isn't. And yes, it was wonderful getting some critical accolades, but we made this movie for an audience, and you're who we made it for. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.